Good afternoon and welcome to all of you that are attending this new webinar organized by the Johan Institute, in which we will be talking about very passionate topic, which is coaching. My name is Lucas, and I will be your host today. And it is my pleasure to introduce you our guest speaker, Fritz Schmidt. He's the UEFA Pro licensed coach with more than 30 years of experience in football, including both an amateur and elite youth football, as well as all levels of professional football. Fritz will offer us an insight to the reality of various coaches who train sometimes in the background, far from the spotlights, and in countries with very different cultures. We will have a look at their day-to-day life, their methodology, and their challenges to live football the most followed and analyzed sport in the world. Just to remind you, everyone that during the Fritz presentation, once the presentation is over, we will open a debate so everyone could participate. You can write your questions in the question tab that is located on the right of your screen. If you have any technical problems, we will assist you through the chat. So basically, without any further delays, we have 1 hour ahead to talk about the topic how to coach in different cultures. So good afternoon, Fritz. Many thanks to joining us today, and whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Lucas, and buenas tardes. Good afternoon to everybody who is sharing this webinar and online. It's a pleasure to give you a little bit an outlook to colleagues, because with my introduction, Lucas forgot to mention that I've also been a part of the students at Johan Cruyff Institute just a while ago. So it's very interesting for me to share some of my experience. In the next 30 minutes, I will try to give you a little bit an outlook into the situation of the professional football coaches worldwide in general. Then I would like also to give you a short idea about cultural issues and challenges you might find when you travel around the world in the business of football. And last but not least, I would like to show you how to get into an environment of a different culture, of a different religion, and still implement your ideas, your way of coaching, and of course, how to pursue the goal to achieve results or to establish high performance environment. But first of all, let me share a little story about my background. Because interesting thing, a good friend of mine, coaching colleague, long ago told me his inspiration, his motivation to be a football coach when we discussed. He told me, I want to travel. I want to travel the world and I want to see the world. And to be honest, at that time, it seemed to be strange to me to have anything else than the passion for the game as a motivation to be in the game. And I thought, I want to be a coach because I want to inspire players, I want to inspire teams, I want to build quality teams, winning teams. So at that time, his explanation was a bit strange in my opinion. But if I look now, as you see, at my last destination, which is on the map here, New Zealand, I have to admit, actually, over the last 30 years, I haven't done anything else but actually travel around the globe. And if you look at the destination New Zealand, my last job has actually been the one which has been the furthest away from my home soil in Switzerland. In between, as you see from the smaller yellow dots, there have been on and off assignments, jobs, involvement in various positions, be it for national teams such as the one in New Zealand, be it as a technical director or a consultant for member associations, for the federations UEFA, FIFA, OFC, and AFC in Asia, or simply for clubs in various functions. And in other words now, you would have to say, yes, if you want to travel the world, you have to be in the football business. And That's maybe one inspiration for some of you. Only allow me to give you one or two aspects which might make it a bit different from any kind of job you take in the normal world of organizations, corporate organizations, or even in sports. Because what you would have to understand, and what you're certainly aware of, you would be moving into a very volatile and fast-moving business. If you travel the world as a football coach, you also might sometimes lead quite an isolated life, lonely life sometimes, because it's not always possible to bring your family, to bring your friends. You would travel, and usually it's a suitcase, your passport, and an airplane ticket, which takes you to a new adventure. So that's already maybe a challenge which you have to be aware of once you get into this situation of considering traveling for football in the world of football. Beyond that, of course, it will also be very challenging for you to get into new environment and have a certain job duration, because as you know, and what I would like to share with you now, just on the slide you have on the screen, the duration, the job guarantee, once you're in the world of football, is not always, to be compared with what you see in the corporate world. If I may give you an idea about some of the figures here on the screen, on top of it left, you have an average duration of a football manager in the English Premiership, according to the most recent reports from the just last season in the English Premiership. You had more than 60, changes of coaches, and if you're a coach, in the average, you last not more than 1 year, 1.18 year exactly. And to be honest, and that's maybe indicating towards the carousel in the middle, your average winning ratio doesn't exceed 30%. And if you look at all the coaches working in the Premiership or in professional football, it's not more than 30% who will get a second shot, a second chance to coach in the same league once you have been sacked the first time. So 60% of all the coaches, they don't get a second job in the same league. So it's quite competitive. If you look at the Swiss league, which is actually compared to the big leagues in Europe, is more a development environment. It's still 200 plus coaches over 20 years in the existing Super League. Now that's the highest tier we have in Switzerland. And if you know that the Swiss league is consisting of 10 clubs, you can do your calculation. If you're coaching in Switzerland, you have to be aware that maybe every year they change the club, the coach, and this is going for every club in the league. To give you an idea how it looks overseas, in places where you would work away from the big screens, from the big, stages, Champions League, maybe an idea regarding the slide and the figure on the bottom at the left, because I have been involved as a technical director and as a consultant for FIFA and UEFA all over the world. And you're talking now the program where you try to educate sports directors, technical directors, managing people who would be working for member associations. If you count FIFA member associations, you have more than 200. And if you consider an educative program for technical people in such positions, which has been introduced over the last 5-10 years, you have a yearly turnover of 50%, meaning out of the 200 plus member associations worldwide, the technical director or the man in charge to manage the development of football in a country doesn't last much longer than a year. From the environment where I'm just coming now, Oceania, you have some indicative, figures in the middle, because Australia, they have an average of 35, if you consider the number of games, if you're in a coaching job, and 35 games before you get the sack means you would have to get started with wins quite immediately. And just to give you an idea about the Australian A-League, which just has started the new season, 2019-2020, 3 weeks ago, you would see a league where every single club is getting into the season with a new coach. And maybe you're also familiar with the fact that sometimes the so-called big shot coaches, the famous coaches who have been involved in big clubs over here in Europe, they might have a better life duration. I want to give you the example of Sven-Göran Eriksson here on the bottom right side of the slide. After all, a coach who has been involved with the England national team for quite a while. He has been very successful in the Italian Serie A and in Portugal. He has moved to Asia, and out of the clubs where he has been involved over the last 4 or 5 years, he would actually finish in a position of the average of 6 months, and he wouldn't even play more than 10 or more games. So this should actually give you maybe just an idea how volatile and how dynamic your environment will be. So you have to be prepared to adapt to certain circumstances and to live a very, very quick, fast life. After that, of course, there is another key element which will always be, in your first focus, because you're traveling, you're getting into a new environment, you're getting to a new country with a completely different culture, and this is maybe something which will strike you first. You will always be a foreigner. The slide in front of you shows you as an indication that every country around the world have their very specific terms and expressions for foreigner. Not every term seems to be, politically correct, but it's also maybe indicating that every now and then you will have to face adversity. You are the man coming from outside, trying to bring change. And if you bring change, that's always challenging for people in the new environment. So before you talk football, to be honest, your primary task should be to understand the culture and the basic principles of daily life before you get started to implement your ideas of the game. You are coming as a stranger, which means, first of all, you have to respect the life and the situation in your new environment, and you have to adapt. It will not be easy or possible even to just step in and implement your ideas of how to run football, how to be successful, if you are not able to understand some of the cultural aspects which actually are dominating daily life of your environment. And here I'm talking players, such as coaches or even managements, opinion leaders, leading people in organizations who give you access to the tools and the possibilities to really implement your game. As an idea, I think I might give you some examples of the last 2 destinations where I have spent years in a different environment. One as a technical director in Malaysia, and one as the national coach in New Zealand. Let's take Malaysia, for instance, a country of more than 30 million. I'm coming from Switzerland, you know, that's a population of nearly 8 million. And you have, number one, to accept the fact that there are different ethnics, and you have a completely different cultural environment regarding the religion. Malaysia is actually formed with mainly three ethnies: the Malay, the Malay, the Indian Malay, and the Chinese Malay. As per constitution, if you are born Malay, you might even have some privileges which are not accessible for Chinese Malay and Indian Malay. And if you deal with social hierarchies, you have to be aware that these issues, they play also a role when you have to select, for instance, a national team. The current national team doesn't show Indian Malay national players, and the current national team doesn't show Chinese national players. So just to understand the environment. Malaysia is further an Islamic culture, and you have to understand certain issues which play into the daily life. Like Malaysian, for instance, they show sometimes quite a fatalistic, attitude towards life. They trust on Allah. You might be familiar with the expression Inshallah, which means God will help, God will look for me to sort out my destiny. If you lose a game and you put this on Inshallah, it's difficult to set some goals in the personal development of your players, for instance. And I had to go through seminars to understand certain ways of coaching in an Islamic country, which was very enriching and beneficial for me, but it took me a while to get the right access towards my players. Also, you have to be aware that you're moving to Asian countries where the concept of face is dominant in everyday's life. The concept of face means actually losing face. If you are criticized, if you are, exposed with certain personal weaknesses in public, that's not what you actually want to live and experience in such an environment. You must be familiar with it. You might have heard of this, but once you get into, the business of football or coaching a team where you want to have players, improve their performance or stick to their qualities and work their weaknesses, you have to take another approach to confront them. You would never take a player at halftime and criticize him in front of his team, because if he loses face in front of his teammates, he will not be able to give you the best performance in the second half. And maybe finally, as another key element which you have to be aware of if you travel to Southeast Asia, it's the challenge of working against match fixing, against corruption. You might be aware that the Asians, they like sport betting. I have to share with you the fact that Malaysia is, with other countries, among those where match fixing has been one of the major issues, even for the world organizations, FIFA security, looking after match fixing. So that's maybe another issue which will get into your daily concern once you are in the football business, whether you're a coach or an official in Southeast Asian or particularly here in Malaysian environment. If I compare this now to New Zealand, I can certainly share with you or guarantee that in New Zealand, you will not face the issue of corruption or match fixing. You will be in a very modern, actually even forward-minded environment where you would have to face completely different challenges. One of which, obviously, is the remoteness of the country. You're looking at the population of nearly 5 million New Zealanders, and you might also know that in New Zealand, they say there are more sheep than football players. If you want to build a strong football national team, the first thing you have to understand is you're not involved in the most important sports issue of New Zealand daily life, because as you might have followed just recently during the Rugby World Cup, it is the All Blacks, the national rugby team, which dominates the headlines throughout the whole year. And this makes it already a bit difficult to challenge the big sport number one, and to also to get players, to get new talents stepping into football. You see the Maori culture represented in the haka in the All Blacks setup, but obviously you will not see too many Maori athletes in the football game. Football players, usually they come out of middle class environment, and very often they have the opportunity to either get into football and to accept the challenge to go very difficult pathways to make it overseas, but also they have obviously very interesting opportunities in their academic career or in other job careers. So it's difficult to compete with certain sports if you are in New Zealand football. The map, the world map on the right side of the slide, is indicating how difficult it is to bring all the international players together once you want to work with the national team. 50-60% of all the international players, they play spread out overseas in leagues in Europe, in South Africa, in America. There are a handful of players playing in the Premier League in England, but the rest of the players would mostly be active in average or lower leagues around Europe and in the MLS in the United States. So if you want to bring in the players, you have to run long distances and you have to cover mileage before you get active. And once you step out of your environment in the Pacific, you will realize that you step into another world in terms of competition. As you see on the slide, and that's the result of 0-10, indicating that the competition in the Oceanian environment is, of course, not of the same level as you would expect in Asia or in European competition, which means New Zealand has very often found quite a cheap track to qualify to international competition, because if you're playing teams like Vanuatu, American Samoa, the Fiji Islands, New Caledonia, or Haiti, it's obvious that not all of these countries are as competitive as international opponents. And if you step out of this environment, it will be very difficult to compete on the world level. And again, considering the remoteness of the country, it is very difficult to bring in international teams to compete with them and to get some, comparison with best practice. So if you consider such challenges, how do you actually try to implement your ideas of high performance environment, of certain measurement, of certain tools to improve the quality of the game, to achieve results, and actually to implement your ideas as a football coach. And here, and that's what the slide in front of you should actually try to indicate. Here, it's very interesting from your experience, going through the studies at the Johan Cruyff Institute, that the tools I picked up during my studies for sports management can be applied one-on-one to the game of football, to the business of football, whether you are involved in the management area or whether you're involved in the technical area as a coach. As you can see here, of course, one on the left side, you see a basic strategic planning circle where you go through the various stages of identifying your goals, your vision, and also, identifying your identity. Because if you represent the national team of New Zealand, and if you wear the jersey of the national team of New Zealand in football, you want this to develop a certain brand. You want this shirt to represent certain values. And this has to be established and elaborated in cooperation with all the involved stakeholders, which means the players directly. So before I did get into performance issues regarding technical performance, that's actually what we did with the team. When you take a look at the circle on the right side of the slide, team chemistry, team values, and also the composure of the teams regarding age structure was the first issue before we would get into performance elements. This would involve certain workshops, identifying the key elements of our culture together with the players, where we would actually also step into certain Maori elements, because that's actually the roots of their environment. And we would also identify each and every player's or staff member's motivation to be involved in our project before we would actually get into performance analysis. But sooner or later, obviously, it's clear that you have to talk football and you have to talk results, and you have to identify the situation where you're in, because if they ask you to get to the World Cup, you will have to identify the possibilities and your resources if you really want to make World Cup history with a small country such as New Zealand. And that's actually now showing you a few steps which we went through with the team, because when I picked the team, it was obviously at the time of the World Cup being played in Russia, which allowed us to bring up some teams to compare with, which actually made it to the World Cup. You see on the slide 6 nations with more or less similar resources, similar size of population, and similar numbers of registered football players. And it was for our team and our staff important to identify certain key performance parameters in the technical area of the game and compare them to certain of these countries to see, would it be possible to make the same achievement, to get the same result as these countries, whether it's Costa Rica, whether it's Croatia, whether it's Iceland, and to see where we have to step in to improve actually our performance and work on our performance. Some of the key aspects you see here on the screen of the next slide, showing you a few aspects defining technical key performance parameters. We're talking about passing ratio. We're talking about goal average. We identified the average of possession, of losing possession. We identified the area where we would actually recover possession, where we would lose possession, and how we would score. That allows you to set up a framework of certain key performance parameters. Usually you talk about 10 to 15 parameters, and we did an assessment before we presented this to the team to put this in a context with the countries we showed on the last slide here. So we would actually pick out and analyze the performance parameters of these aspects over the last 4 to 8 years, and we put them in a context and comparing framework with all the other nations. And to spare you from reading facts and figures and a lot of numbers, it has been put in a framework like this, which you see in front of you, showing actually the performance. And if you have this framework, you just imagine the various key performance parameters listed on the left side of this framework, and you take the either 100% performance leading from the left side towards the right. The best performance would usually pop up and appear on the right side of this frame, and the various flags, the country symbols, represent the position not only of the smaller nations which made it to the World Cup, such as Croatia, Costa Rica, Panama, Paraguay. It's also indicating the world best practice, because that's the world standard. Germany, which you would obviously see here, very often appear on the right side of the screen. And now the shocking, or maybe the very moment of truth, was to show where New Zealand would be positioned in this comparison. And as you see, there is a lot of room for work already, indicating here that with the fact that actually in all the key areas which we have identified, New Zealand would have to make up a lot of space, close the gap, to make it maybe sooner or later possible to get to the World Cup. We showed this, the players, we worked this through with the players, and we would actually invite the players now to come out with some of the first elements where they thought we might maybe start working on key parameters. This involving their approach to work, their approach to the cultural impact in the game, their environment, and they will actually have to identify a number of elements, just showing, look, we have to start where we are. We have to, you have to use what we have, our resources in our environment, in our very specific cultural environment, and you have to do what you can. So they came out with some of the first key parameters. We introduced them to our daily work, to our camps when we prepared for international games. And the only thing which I am not able now to share with you are the facts and figures of our performance indicators in the first few camps. We played the first game against Canada in March in Spain, and we had another international tournament playing 4 games in India with opponents from India, Kenya, and Taipei. And considering the facts and the key performance indicators worked out by the players, it was an easy thing to have all the players involved in the project, motivated to work on certain key elements, and actually to put it on the pitch. We had very positive, I may say that, we had a very positive outcome, and it's easier to keep players involved in a project when you can show them, look, these are your parameters, these are your individual goals, and that's where we're getting our first results. So in short words, as a conclusion, as a summary, yes, if you travel, if you travel as a football coach, you can see the world, but please adapt and respect that you're in a cultural environment which is not, always the same as yours where you come from. And once you get into this environment and you can work with the environment and you can adapt and you respect the culture where you're in, it's still possible to take a very professional approach to performance, to developing certain qualities, and to use the tools which we are used to use when we come from a background like our studies, like your studies, or like a coaching environment in Europe. With this, I hope I have given you a short outlook into challenges and the various aspects about coaching in different environments. And I would be looking forward to share some discussions or to have some questions. Thank you very much for your input and your attention.
All right, Fritz. Well, first of all, thank you very much to you, because I think it was very, very passionate topic and very good topic that you've been speaking very passionately about. So in the meantime, we've started with several questions, and it's always great to see that the people were not only listening to you, but they were also asking questions. So I will start with an easy one, because it seems like an easy one. Stefan is asking, what further education can you recommend? UEFA or FIFA certificate? That's just the warm-up question for the beginning.
If you are working in a UEFA member association, I would recommend, going through the UEFA structure, because every confederation has their challenges to adapt to the various requirements of the international coaching structure. And I have seen this in Asia and in Oceania. If you pick a license of, let's say, the same level, it's not always the same content. It's like Coca-Cola in a different bottle. You want to have the best, and it is fair to say that the standards of the UEFA coach education still is considered best practice. So my recommendation is stick with UEFA.
All right. Okay. Good. Let's see if Stefan will do this.
Good luck.
Okay. Sane was asking very interesting question, and right now we are getting to a little bit more difficult topics. The question is, how do you adapt to those different environments? Is a big part preparation before you go, or just experience what is happening at the moment? It's interesting question, because obviously you were mentioning it before, that you need to respect the culture, you need to respect the environment you are getting into. But it's good to know how you could adapt to different environments, and if the preparation is big part or just the general experience is important. What do you think?
Look, if you are an open-minded person, of course, you always observe what's happening in the world. But you never know where you are going to get before you sign a contract. So once you sign a contract, you might maybe start to study about the new environment where you're supposed to get in. And I can assure you that's what I even did when I went a very short distance from Switzerland to Austria, where I was involved as a national coach with the men's national team. So what you do, you try to learn and study as much about your new environment as you can. I mean, of course, you will be busy running around to settle technical issues, but the more you have access to people to learn and understand about the key elements in your environment, the better you'll be able to adapt. What I also have to say, and that's maybe a bit an average experience, but very often you have to allow yourself enough time, and I'm talking months. It's not a week or a few days. You have to allow yourself months to get familiar with daily life, with the habits of your environment. you will be dealing with staff, but also with officials, sometimes with politicians. And the more you exchange and the more you learn, you try to study, the more you'll be able to adapt as soon as possible.
Okay. With this, I will ask you a question that it's very interesting for me actually, and this is coming from me. But as someone who's been living abroad for more than 12 years in different countries, do you think there are some specific personality traits or some kind of attributes that one must have in order to be prepared for this? Or if you are if you're having some kind of different skill set, it could be easier for you to adapt?
I think that's all, regarding your soft skills, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think you come in as a change agent. You're taking a position in an environment where your professional skills have been evaluated. And if they wouldn't evaluate your professional skills as good enough, they wouldn't sign you up. But your soft skills, your personal, your interaction, how you interact, how you communicate, and again, most importantly, once you get into another environment, the way of getting involved in your new environment is crucial. Of course, number one is language. Mm-hmm. Is all language. I mean, Malaysia, that's Bahasa Melayu, which is actually an easy language if you compare it to other languages, if you have to pick up a language. But you have to understand how your environment communicates. And last but not least, I think you have to be very open-minded, sometimes a bit humble, because you when you get into confrontation, very often you take it maybe as a personal reaction. You think maybe you're not good enough in what you're doing. And very often it's not the things on the pitch you decide, it's not the football decisions you make, it's more the mistakes, if I may make it mistakes, if I can call it like this, the things you do outside of your technical environment, which creates the biggest challenges.
All right. Your reply was perhaps already related with the question that Antonella was asking, because obviously your presentation was more about coaching. However, she is curious about the fact that if this could be applicable also on the management side. So people who are not coaches, but people who are going to be managers in the business side, if they need to more or less, if these kind of things that you were talking about are applicable on the same level or not.
I would say absolutely, absolutely. As I have mentioned, in Malaysia, I was actually in the role of a technical director, which means you're in the top management of the Football Federation, which is easily to compare with a position in any corporate organization, because you're talking structures, you're talking strategies, you're talking business plans, you're talking human resources, you're talking not only leadership questions, very much managing issues. And the more you get from this background, the more you will be able to adapt, whether it's in the football business or in another environment. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. Let's move on a little bit, because this is going to be a tricky one, I think, and it's going to be very interesting. Marine was asking about how to deal with different cultural differences within the team. As an example, he's mentioning that obviously he's having in his team players from Argentina, Australia, the Netherlands, Scotland, France. So obviously different cultures, different habits, and different personalities, traits within the same team. Do you have any tips or managing tips or hints how to deal with this?
Well, I think it's a very good question, because the global expansion of the game itself and the market, how it has developed. It's not only coaches traveling around the world, it's also players traveling. It's a big it's a big fluctuation, it's a big traffic. And when I talk to coaches and clubs, even in our environment, I take the same approach. You have players from different cultural backgrounds, and before you just put them into your structure, the most important thing is to understand where they come from. You have to get into, direct communication. You have to establish a relationship with these players, and you have to understand how they tick. I usually put it down to two questions. How do they tick? What makes them tick? And how do they kick, if I may say that? So what's their education? What's their cultural background in places where they come from? And very often you would be surprised to see that a lot of coaches, they don't waste too much time to understand these issues. But the player will only be able to perform at his best or her best if they feel comfortable, if they feel at home, and if they feel welcome. They need to have this mutual understanding and also the mutual respect to their habits and their culture.
Okay, thank you. We will continue with the cultural diversity a little bit, because Joyce was asking very interesting question, which is more related with the style of play. Obviously, if we are speaking about the Netherlands, well, obviously total football. If we are speaking about Italy, maybe the first thing that comes to our mind is catenaccio, so more defensive approach. So how do you think, or how do you go about when you think the style of play needs to be changed in different country and different places, and based on the technical part, not maybe the behavior or attitude of your players?
Now that's the easiest question, to be honest. Because the first thing I would have to say, and that's no offense, you can't change too much of their game. You have to understand what are their resources, what are their qualities. And that's why I'm saying your approach in terms of technical aspects is very similar to your approach as a manager, because you have to assess your environment. You have to do, a quality assessment. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the values in this environment? And now, obviously, and you know that, every place where you go, they want to win the league or they want to go to the World Cup. So your task is to show them, number one, what are the key performance indicators, or what are the key parameters of what we call best practice. How do the best in the world play football? And then you have to open up a very open discussion on the quality and the way they play football in your new environment. Like I have showed in this slides with the various country flags, and you have to show them, look, there is a gap, there is, the necessity to assess where do we stand in comparison to the best, and how can we close this gap by using our qualities. Look, Malaysia, you wouldn't find many players of the height of 180, or in English measurement 6 foot 6'5". So that's indicating that maybe it won't be the best thing to play, long balls and work on an aerial play. And in other countries, you have the issue of maybe the quality of the passing and the quality of connecting. So it might not be the wisest thing to apply tiki-taka like we know it from Spanish representatives. Mm-hmm. But if you identify the key principles of successful game, of successful football, you show them how to approach these principles, it is possible to reach a certain level and a certain quality, and to compete with your own qualities and with your own resources.
All right, thank you very much. Very, very interesting insight. We have still 2 questions left, so let's go on with it. First, I will start with Chris James. His question is around team culture. Would you consider team culture the main focus entering a new environment, and how much importance do you place on this in regards to time management when beginning a new role?
I must be very honest. I always focus on team culture and cohesion before I get technical, because I think that's one aspect which every now and then gets a bit short. We all know if you take a new team as a coach, your first focus must be to win the first few games. You have seen how long you will survive if you're not successful. But again, you have players in your group coming from different environments, maybe even different cultures. And we know that the players of the younger generations, they all have also their personal ambition, their personal goals. In the top level, some might even tell you that these players, they have their own brands, and it's sometimes more important what they wear, where they communicate, and how many Facebook followers they can provide. But you have to identify their motivation, their drivers, which make them really follow a certain project, and you have to unite, you have to bring all your involved players and your staff into one project. So that's why I think team culture and the whole identity of your group or your club or your country is crucial before you get into technical aspects.
All right. And the best for last, which is the question from Petros. So far, we've been talking more about maybe professional football or national teams, but he's more focusing on the youth football, and especially in a country where maybe sporting culture is an issue, like maybe in India. What about working on a youth level in such a difficult environment where maybe sport could be, in general, the sporting culture could be an issue?
Look, I may share with you that I have been involved in various projects regarding youth, or what they call grassroots football. I have been in so-called social responsibility projects. Mm-hmm. I have worked with victims of human trafficking, with girls, finding structure in football. And this quote, and we have heard it in the beginning during the introduction, they say sports is an international language which has the power to connect people. Mm-hmm. If sport is really this international language, I would dare to say that's a bit bold, but I would say football is the most common dialect. and I can really confirm from my own experience, if you work with young children, with young people, and you have an opportunity to offer them a platform to play, you're not a coach anymore when you work with young players. You're a facilitator. You're just offering an opportunity to play the game which they are passionate for. I have to say that's one of the most rewarding activities you can get in the business of football. It's not very, it's not always financially the biggest inspiration, but you see the power of this game, and that's throughout all the countries. I've seen this in India, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, in Africa, everywhere I go. If you're involved in this area, I have to give you my highest respect, and you will have the biggest reward, because you see how much these tools and this game can bring people together.
Okay, thank you very much. One last question, actually, that I wanted to ask maybe before, but Chris James, again, he advanced a little bit. So I think it's very interesting, because this could be like the final suggestion for the people that are watching this webinar. So I will just read it, because I think it's a very good question. When applying for positions around the world, what are the key elements you are trying to make the employers, the directors, the CEOs aware apart from your obvious experience in football? Does this approach change in relation to the country you wish to work?
Yes, it does. If I want to answer the last part of the question, yes, it does. It does change my approach with respect to the place where I'm actually trying to get involved. And that's part of your evaluation of your potential, of your job opportunity. And while the other side, whether it's a club or a federation, they are actually focusing on your CV, you will have to study where you're getting at. You have to do this before you start applying and before you get into this process. And this might, of course, also have an impact on how you present yourself, how you introduce. Unfortunately, to be honest, it's not always the case the other way around. I mean, you know how it works. Everybody wants successful coaches. And very often, the question is not if anybody is looking for a new coach or someone new in a certain position. They ask themselves who is available and can we afford to pay him? And these questions would never allow you to identify the qualities of a certain candidate. I mean, of course, if you are able to present and to show, indicate the values and your philosophy, how you approach your task, this would be very, very helpful. But you would also have to rely on the other side to really take a look and focus on certain qualities which are beyond a CV or just titles and trophies, to be honest.
Okay. Once again, Fritz, it was a huge pleasure to have you. As always, all the good things once have to come to the end, and I would say that this would be the end. This would be the end. So seriously, thank you very much for your time. I think it was absolutely great to have you. I'm sure that all those people that were watching us and those people that will be watching us a little bit later will appreciate your insights, your experience, and your knowledge. So thank you very much. To those of you that were joining us, we would appreciate a lot if you could take a few minutes to answer the questions in the service tab, which is like the third one where you see the polls located on the top right of your screen. Remember that you will soon receive a link to the recording of this webinar, which you will be able to download. We invite you, as always, to stay connected with us, because in November, we will return with a new webinar that will be about data and technology. Our guests will be Paul Adriani and Chelsea Disseldorf from KPMG, and the webinar will be in English. So just to say a few last words, thank you very much to all of you for participating. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, and looking forward to see you next time. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for your interest, and all the best in your future studies and endeavors. Thank you.
All the best to you, Fritz. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.